Ransomware is a form of malware that encrypts a victim's files. The attacker then demands a ransom from the victim to restore access to the data upon payment. Users are shown instructions for how to pay a fee to get the decryption key. The cost can range from a few $100s to thousands, payable to cybercriminals in Bitcoin. In this video, we are going to explain how ransomware works and ways to prevent and remove it. There are a number of vectors ransomware can take to access a computer. One of the most common delivery systems is phishing scams, attachments that come to the victim in an email, masquerading as a file they should trust. Once they're downloaded and opened, they can take over the victim's computer, especially if they have built-in social engineering tools that trick users into allowing administrative access. Some other, more aggressive forms of ransomware exploit security holes to infect computers without needing to trick users. There are several things the malware might do once it's taken over the victim's computer, but by far the most common action is to encrypt some or all of the user's files. The most important thing to know is that at the end of the process, the files cannot be decrypted without a mathematical key known only by the attacker. The user is presented with a message explaining that their files are now inaccessible and will only be decrypted if the victim sends an untraceable Bitcoin payment to the attacker. In some forms of malware, the attacker might claim to be a law enforcement agency, shutting down the victim's computer due to the presence of illegal content, and demanding the payment of a fine, perhaps to make the victim less likely to report the attack to authorities. But most attacks don't bother with this pretense. There is also a variation called leakware or doxware, in which the attacker threatens to publicize sensitive data on the victim's hard drive unless a ransom is paid. But because finding and extracting such information is a very tricky proposition for attackers, encryption ransomware is by far the most common type. There are several different ways attackers choose the organizations they target with ransomware. Sometimes it's a matter of opportunity. For instance, attackers might target universities because they tend to have smaller security teams and a user base that does a lot of file sharing, making it easier to penetrate their defenses. On the other hand, some organizations are tempting targets because they seem more likely to pay a ransom quickly. For instance, government agencies or medical facilities often need immediate access to their files. Law firms and other organizations with sensitive data may be willing to pay to keep news of a compromise quiet, and these organizations may be uniquely sensitive to leakware attacks. But don't feel like you're safe if you don't fit into these categories. As we noted, some ransomware spreads automatically and indiscriminately across the internet. There are a number of defensive steps you can take to prevent ransomware infection. These steps are good security practices in general, so following them improves your defenses from all sorts of attacks. Keeping your operating systems patched and up to date to ensure you have fewer vulnerabilities to exploit. Don't install software or give it administrative privileges unless you know exactly what it is and what it does. Install antivirus software which detects malicious programs like ransomware as they arrive, and whitelisting software which prevents unauthorized applications from executing in the first place. And of course, back up your files, frequently and automatically. That won't stop a malware attack, but it can make the damage caused by one much less significant. If your computer has been infected with ransomware, you'll need to gain control of your machine. Remove the device from the internet. Scan the system using anti-malware software to find the ransomware program. Restore the computer to a previous state. But here's the important thing to keep in mind. While walking through these steps can remove the malware from your computer and restore it to your control, it won't decrypt your files. Their transformation into unreadability has already happened, and if the malware is at all sophisticated, it will be mathematically impossible for anyone to decrypt them without access to the key that the attacker holds. In fact, by removing the malware, you've precluded the possibility of restoring your files by paying the attackers the ransom they've asked for. Ransomware is big business. There's a lot of money in ransomware, and the market expanded rapidly from the beginning of the decade. In 2017, ransomware resulted in $5 billion in losses, both in terms of ransoms paid and lost time in recovering from attacks. That's up 15 times from 2015. In the first quarter of 2018, just one kind of ransomware software, SamSam, collected $1 million in ransom money. Some markets are particularly prone to ransomware and to paying the ransom. Many high-profile ransomware attacks have occurred in hospitals or other medical organizations, which make tempting targets. Attackers know that, with lives literally in the balance, these enterprises are more likely to simply pay a relatively low ransom to make a problem go away. It's estimated that 45% of ransomware attacks target healthcare organizations, and conversely, that 85% of malware infections at healthcare organizations are ransomware. Another tempting industry, the financial services sector. It's estimated that 90% of financial institutions were targeted by a ransomware attack in 2017. Your anti-malware software won't necessarily protect you. Ransomware is constantly being written and tweaked by its developers, so its signatures are often not caught by typical antivirus programs. In fact, as many as 75% of companies that fall victim to ransomware were running up-to-date endpoint protection on the infected machines.